Welcome to part 10 of our series on building a Zelda-like game in Phaser 3. Now it's time to bring our game to life with smooth animations. In this video, we'll create an animation component that allows our player and other game objects to transition between different animations seamlessly. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Let's dive in and add some animation magic. Alright, so for our animation component, let's go into our source folder, let's go into our game object components, let's do new, we'll do an animation component. Let's copy over our code for our speed component to our animation component. We'll update our class name, we'll do animation component. Alright, so for our animation component, we need a way to map our player's animation keys to something that's a little bit more generic. As an example, right now for our player's animation keys, this consists of player walk down, player walk up, player walk side. And if we want our components to be reusable for any character, such as our enemies, we need a way to map these keys to a generic configuration. So then that way we can just pass in our generic configuration here in our idle state. And what we'd want to do is we want to pass in something like idle followed by our direction that we just created. And so it'll be like left. And so in this configuration, we need to map this key to our key for our game object, so that way we play our correct animation. So as an example here, let's say if we want to do walk left for our player. For our player, this would need to map to our player walk side animation here, but then for a different object type like our spider, we just have this generic spider walk animation, and that's the one we'd want to play. So in our component, we need to be able to support passing in this configuration, so we map to the correct animation for that game object. And so to support that, we have this generic mapping here called character animations. What this mapping has is for our various animations we want to play, we have that as a prefix with the direction that we want to play our animation for. So what we'll do is for our player, we're going to pass in this configuration object that's going to have these keys of like idle down, idle up, idle left. It's going to map to our player's animation keys here for player walk down, player walk up, and player walk side. So to add in support for that configuration back in our animation component, let's remove our speed from our arguments, and we're going to change this to be config, and we'll define a new type, and we're going to call this animation config. Let's copy that. We'll come up to the top of our file. We'll do export type. We'll set equal to our animation config, and now in our object, for our keys, we want our keys to map to our keys here on character animations. And we want these to be optional since not all characters need to do the same animations. As an example, for lifting objects up, our player needs to be able to do that, but our spider enemy will not need to do that. So to make these optional, we'll do key in our character animations. And so we'll make this optional. And then now for our type here, this is going to be an object. For our object, we'll want to be able to pass in this configuration here that we're currently using for our animations. So we'll need to know which key we want to play, if we want it to repeat, and then we want to do ignore if playing. So back in our object here for our type, let's do our key. It's going to be a string. We'll have repeat. This is going to be a number, and we'll do ignore if playing. And that'll be a Boolean. So now let's add this property to our class. We'll get rid of speed. We'll do config. Our type will be our animation config. Let's do this.config will be equal to the config we provided in our constructor. And then we'll go ahead and get rid of our getter. For our animation component, we'll want to expose three methods. One for seeing if an animation is currently playing, one to actually play an animation, and then one to get an animation key to see if it exists on our configuration. We'll start with our method to see if an animation is playing. So we'll do public, we'll do is animation playing. This will return a Boolean value, and we just need to return this, our game object, our anims property, then we'll do is playing. So since our game object is currently typed to either an image or a sprite game object, we're going to override our default value for our game object on this component to point to a sprite. To do that on our class, let's add protected, we'll do declare. Now we need to override game object. Now for our game object type, we're going to do phaser, game objects, sprite. Next for our method to see if an animation key exists, we'll do public, we'll do get animation key. For this method, we'll expect one argument. We'll expect our character animation key we want to check for. And so for our type, this will be a character animation. And we'll either return a string or undefined if it doesn't exist. So now we just need to check to see if this exists on our configuration. So we'll do if this, our config, and then our character animation key that was provided. If it's equal to undefined, so that key doesn't exist, we'll return undefined. Otherwise, we'll return that value. So we'll do this, our config, our character animation key, and now we'll grab the key from that object. Finally, for our method for play animation, let's do public. We'll do play animation. So now for this method, we'll need our character animation key for which animation we want to play. So let's copy this. And one other argument we'll add is we're going to add in an optional callback. And so this callback is going to be used for once our animation is finished, then we can invoke any code that we want only when our animation is done. So for this method, we won't return anything. So first, we're going to make sure our animation key actually exists. We're going to copy this line of code here. If it doesn't exist, we're going to check to see if our callback was defined. If it was, we'll call it. And then we'll just return early. If our key does exist, now we want to play our animation. So we're going to do this. We'll do our game object. We'll do play. And now we need to provide the animation configuration that we want to use. And so we're just going to call this animation config, and we'll define that in a second. And now we want to specify if we want to ignore if playing. So we'll do this. We'll reference our config. We'll do our character animation key. And then we'll reference our ignore if playing. So now for our animation config, we'll do const. We'll do animation config. And for our type, this is going to be a phaser types animation. And then we want to do play animation config. So for this, we'll have our key. And so this is going to reference our key from our object that we look up. So let's copy this. We'll paste it. And we'll reference key. Now we'll do repeat. And then one other property we'll set is we're going to set our timescale. And we're just going to have this default to 1 for any animation we play. One last thing we want to do is if our callback is provided, we need to register an event listener for once our animation is finished. Then that way we can call our callback. So let's do if our callback is provided. And now to register our event listener, we need to go on our game object. We want to use the once method to register a one-time event listener. And now we need to define the animation key. We'll define that in 1 second. And then in our callback for this event, we just want to call our callback we defined. So now the event we want to listen for, we're going to set that to our animation key. And this is going to be a phaser, our animations, our events, and this will be our animation complete key, combined with the key of the animation we're playing. So this particular event will be fired only when this animation is done playing. Now that we have our animation component set up, let's jump over to our player class and let's create an instance of our animation component. So up on our class, let's add a new property to keep track of this. So we'll have our animation component. For our type, we'll do our animation component. Now down here, we'll do this. Our animation component is equal to a new animation component. So now we'll pass in the instance of our player, and now let's define a new object. We'll do animation config, and we'll define that up above. So we'll do const, our animation config. Let's add in our type. So now on our config, now we need to provide our keys of the animations we want to support. And so we'll have walk down, and then this will be typed to our object. And so for our key, this will be our player animation keys, and then walk down. We'll do repeat. We want this to be -1 because we want this to repeat. And then ignore if playing, we'll set to true. So we copy this. We need to do our 4 directions. And so we're going to have walk down, walk up, walk left and right. And now on our player animation keys, we'll want to do walk up, and then we'll want to do walk side. Now we want to do the same thing for our idle animations. So we're going to copy all 4 of those, and we're just going to change this to be idle. So I'm just going to copy that part, and we'll paste it. Now for our idle animations, we'll do idle down, idle up, and then we'll do idle side. And we'll keep the same settings because we want our idle animation to repeat, and we want to ignore if playing. Finally, on our player class, let's add a getter for returning our animation component. So we'll do get, we'll do animation component. For our type, we'll return our animation component, and we'll do return this, our animation component. Now let's jump over to our states, and we'll start updating those to use our new component. So now in our idle state, when we go to player animation, now we should be able to reference our game object. We can reference our animation component, and now we can do play animation. And so now for our animation key, now we want to use our generic character animation key. So this is going to have a prefix of idle, and then we want to use our character's direction so we play the appropriate animation. So we're going to do this, our game object, and then our direction. So now let's remove our console log and our other animation line. We'll save. Alright, so if we save and we move our character around in our scene, we'll see as soon as we let go of our keyboard, our character plays the appropriate animation for the direction we are facing. Now we just want to make that same change in our move state file. So let's copy this line of code. We'll open up move state, And now anytime we play an animation, we want to base that on our direction. So a good spot to do this will be down in our update direction method. So let's paste our code down there. And now for our prefix, we want to do walk, and then we'll use our game object's direction to play the correct one. All right, so now we just need to remove our code where we play our other animations. So up in our onUpdate method, let's get rid of our 2 animations here from when we do up or down. But then down in our checks, when we're moving left and right, we need to move our update direction call to be inside our if statements here. So we'll do this, let's remove this, and then we'll do the same thing for right. And now if we save back over in our game, we should be able to move our character, and as we move in our various directions, we play the correct animation. And so by setting up our component this way, we made it so our states are now reusable across all of our game objects. So currently this works with our player, but once we go to add in our enemies like our spider and our wisp, we'll be able to play our animation with our generic name here, and our code will just work. Later on, if we ever want to add things like NPCs, we could reuse these same components and have those characters move around our scene as well and play their animation types. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.